It was a Sunday evening, and the house was filled with the quiet hum of everyday life. I had been married to Lisa for nearly 8 years now, and while our relationship had its ups and downs, I always believed we were strong enough to weather any storm. That day, I was sitting on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I realized I hadn't seen Lisa in a while. Usually, she'd be sitting next to me, pretending to read a book while sneaking glances at whatever show I was watching. But tonight, the silence seemed different. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe she was just tired or needed some space. She had been busier than usual lately, always running off to meet friends or staying late at work. I wanted to believe her explanations were true, even though part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Dinner came and went without much conversation. Lisa barely touched her food, which wasn't unusual, but tonight she seemed especially distant. She spent most of the evening on her phone, occasionally glancing up at me, her eyes reflecting an emotion I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Sadness? I couldn't tell. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, just work stuff. I'll be better tomorrow, promise." I nodded, pretending to believe her. But that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that tomorrow wasn't going to bring any answers. In fact, I was starting to worry that tomorrow might bring more questions than I was ready to face. At some point, I drifted off to sleep. But it wasn't long before I was jolted awake by the sound of Lisa's phone vibrating on the nightstand next to her side of the bed. It was almost 1 a.m. Who would be texting her at this hour? My heart thudded in my chest as I stared at the phone, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. My curiosity got the best of me. Carefully, I reached over and picked up her phone. The screen was still unlocked. A text message from someone named Jake stared back at me. "Jake, can't wait to see you tomorrow. I miss you so much." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My hand trembled as I scrolled up, finding more messages, some innocent, others far from it. The truth was there, in every text, every flirty exchange, every secret meeting they had planned. My stomach twisted into knots as the realization sank in. Lisa was cheating on me. And not just emotionally, these messages were explicit, filled with promises of nights spent together, the kind that had nothing to do with late work shifts or harmless friendships. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might wake her. I put her phone back on the nightstand, trying to calm my racing mind. But it was impossible. Every beat of my heart was a reminder that my marriage was built on a lie. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I couldn't. Morning came far too quickly, and I had barely closed my eyes. Lisa woke up like it was any other day, stretching and smiling at me as if the night before hadn't just shattered my world. I forced a smile back, but every word, every move felt like it was happening in slow motion. I was already replaying the text in my head, the casual way she told Jake she missed him, the flirtatious tone that didn't belong in a conversation between two coworkers. I wanted to confront her right then and there, ask her what the hell was going on, but something inside me, maybe fear, maybe shock, held me back. I needed more information, needed to be sure before I went charging in. I didn't want to give her a chance to deny it or twist the situation. No, I needed to be smart about this. I kept up the facade during breakfast. She was her usual self, humming as she poured her coffee, talking about weekend plans. It was like she was living in a completely different reality from mine. Every word that came out of her mouth felt like a lie. But I didn't let on. I played along, acting like nothing had changed, even though everything had. "I might head out for a bit today," she said, sipping her coffee. "I told Amanda I'd meet her for lunch." The lie came so easily. She didn't even flinch. "Yeah, sure," I replied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Tell her I said hi." The moment she left, I sprang into action. I grabbed her laptop and headed straight for her email. She'd always been careless with her passwords, so I had no problem logging in. If she was hiding something, I was going to find it. I scrolled through her inbox, at first finding nothing out of the ordinary. Work emails, subscription notifications, the usual mundane stuff. But then I found it. A string of messages buried deep in a folder she had tried to hide. The sender? Jake. I opened the first one, my stomach churning. "Jake, last night was amazing. I can still smell you on me. Can't wait for next time." The rage was immediate, hot, and overwhelming. I clicked through more of the messages, finding dozens of similar ones. They had been meeting for months, sneaking around behind my back, using every excuse in the book to justify their time together. It wasn't just physical. There were messages that showed an emotional connection too. The kind of connection I thought only we had. I read every word, feeling more sick with each line. How long had I been blind to this? How long had she been betraying me while coming home and lying to my face? I knew what I had to do next. I couldn't sit here drowning in this betrayal without a plan. I needed to know everything. Where they met, how often, how far it had gone. I needed more than just texts and emails. I needed proof, undeniable proof that would corner her, leave her with no way out. I decided to install a GPS tracker on her car. It was a low point for me sneaking around like this, but I needed to know where she was going, who she was seeing. I had no idea how much more of her life had been a lie, and I wasn't about to let her control the narrative. While she was out with Amanda, I ordered the tracker and set up everything on my phone. The plan was in motion. That night when she got home, she was all smiles, acting like she had nothing to hide. We watched TV, ate dinner, went to bed like it was just another normal day, but I barely heard a word she said. All I could think about was the next step. I had a sinking feeling that the rabbit hole went deeper than I could imagine. As she drifted off to sleep next to me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything I had learned that day. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow I would know everything, and then I would make my move. The next day arrived, and I was running on fumes. Sleep had become a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing sense of dread and anger that I couldn't shake. Lisa moved through the house with the same ease, making breakfast, getting ready, and heading off to work like nothing was amiss. But I knew better. I was watching her closely now, every gesture, every word scrutinized. When she left for work, I activated the GPS tracker on her car. It was an odd feeling, knowing that I was essentially spying on my wife, but I couldn't ignore the facts anymore. The messages were still fresh in my mind, burning like a hot iron on my soul. I needed to know where she went and who she was with. I needed to expose the full truth. As I sat at home pretending to work from my laptop, I kept the GPS app open on my phone, tracking her every move. For the first few hours, she was at her office, which lined up with what she had told me. But then, right around lunchtime, her car moved. She wasn't headed to any restaurant nearby. No, she was driving to the other side of town, to a place I recognized all too well. It was a hotel. My heart pounded in my chest as the little icon representing her car parked in front of it. The truth was becoming painfully clear, but it wasn't enough to just watch. I had to see it with my own eyes. I grabbed my keys and rushed out the door, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I knew what I was doing was reckless, but there was no stopping me now. The hotel was about 15 minutes away, but the drive felt like an eternity. I had no plan for what I would do once I got there, whether I'd confront her, confront him, or just walk away with the proof I needed. All I knew was that this had to end. When I pulled into the hotel parking lot, I scanned the rows of cars, spotting hers easily. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I tried to steady myself. There was no turning back now. I parked a few spots away and got out of the car, heading toward the entrance with a mixture of rage and dread. I didn't need to ask for a room number. I already had the information from her texts. Room 203. The elevator ride to the second floor was suffocating, the quiet hum of the building doing nothing to calm the storm inside me. I stepped out and turned the corner, my eyes locking onto the door at the end of the hall. Room 203. My feet felt like lead as I approached, my heart threatening to burst out of my chest. I stood outside the door, listening for any sign of movement. I could hear muffled voices, indistinct but unmistakably hers. And then the sound of a laugh, his laugh. My blood boiled. I knocked. There was a brief pause, followed by the sound of shuffling from inside the room. A second later, the door creaked open slightly, just enough for a man to peek out. Jake, his expression shifted from confusion to panic in an instant as he realized who was standing there. He tried to close the door, but I shoved it open with a force I didn't know I had. The door slammed against the wall, revealing the scene inside. Lisa stood at the foot of the bed, wrapped in a hotel bathrobe, her face pale as a ghost. Her eyes widened in horror, and for a second, none of us moved. The room felt frozen in time, the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm, though I was trembling inside. Lisa didn't respond. She just stood there staring at me, as if she couldn't believe I was really there. Jake, meanwhile, was scrambling to put his clothes on, mumbling apologies that I barely registered. I can explain," Lisa finally stammered, stepping toward me, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said, my voice low and steady. "Don't even try." For a moment, we just stood there, the silence between us filled with all the things that had been left unsaid over the past few months. All the lies, all the betrayals, hanging in the air like a thick fog. Is this what you've been doing while you've been telling me you're staying late at work? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This is who you've been with. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a split second, I could see the guilt written all over her face. But it was too late for guilt, too late for apologies. I turned to Jake, who was now fully dressed and standing awkwardly by the bed. He couldn't meet my eyes. Get out, I said, my voice cold and hard. He didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and bolted for the door, leaving Lisa and me standing there, the weight of the situation crushing down on us both. The door clicked shut behind him, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I'm sorry, Lisa whispered, tears streaming down her face. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I stared at her, feeling a strange numbness creeping over me. I had imagined this moment 100 times, had thought I'd be filled with rage, with a desire to scream and yell. But standing there in that hotel room, all I felt was an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. The fight had been drained out of me. We're done, I said quietly. Her face crumpled and she stepped toward me, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back. We're done, I repeated, my voice firmer this time. I'm filing for divorce. I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there, broken, in the same room where she had broken me. The ride home felt surreal, like I was floating through some foggy nightmare that hadn't quite ended yet. I couldn't believe I had just walked out of that hotel, out of my marriage. My mind was a tangled mess of anger, grief, and exhaustion. I had always pictured Lisa and me together forever, no matter the ups and downs. Now I couldn't even imagine what that future would look like. By the time I got home, my body was on autopilot. I wasn't sure how I had made it back without crashing. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process everything that had just happened. But the more I tried to think it through, the more it all jumbled together. My mind kept replaying the moment I saw them together, the shock on her face, the panic in his. Every detail hit me again like a hammer to the chest. Once I finally got out of the car and stepped inside the house, the quiet was deafening. This was the home we had built together. Every piece of furniture, every picture on the wall, every single corner of it was soaked with memories of us. Memories that now felt tainted, like I could never trust them again. I went straight to the bedroom, slumping onto the edge of the bed. My eyes drifted to the framed wedding photo on the dresser, the one where we both looked so happy, so in love. I felt a bitter twist in my gut. What the hell had happened to us? How had we gotten from that day to this? My phone buzzed in my pocket. I knew who it was before I even looked. Lisa. Lisa. Please, let's talk. I stared at the screen for a moment, then tossed the phone onto the bed without replying. I wasn't ready to talk. I wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to hear what she had to say. There was nothing she could say that would fix this. No explanation, no apology could erase what she had done. I sat there for what felt like hours, lost in thought. Part of me wanted to scream, to punch something, to let out all the rage that was boiling under the surface. But another part of me was too drained to do anything but sit in the silence and feel the weight of my broken heart. It was like I was watching my life fall apart from a distance, too numb to stop it. By late afternoon, I had made a decision. I needed to start taking steps to move forward, as painful as it was. I couldn't just sit in the wreckage and let it bury me. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for divorce lawyers in the area. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the list of names, but I knew this was the only way. After calling and setting up an appointment with a lawyer for the following week, I closed the laptop and rubbed my face. The exhaustion was catching up with me, but before I could lie down, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa. Lisa, please, just give me a chance to explain. I'll do anything to fix this. I sighed, debating whether I should respond. Maybe I owed her a conversation. Maybe there was something she could say that would bring some kind of closure, at least. But what if hearing her voice again only made things worse? Against my better judgment, I texted back, Me. Come by later. We'll talk. The moment I hit send, I regretted it. I wasn't sure if I could handle seeing her face again, hearing her excuses, but I needed to understand why she had done this. I needed to know if there was anything left worth saving, or if this was truly the end of the road for us. The hours ticked by slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. I busied myself with meaningless tasks around the house, trying to keep my mind off the impending confrontation. But no matter how hard I tried, the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing second. Finally, just after 7 p.m., I heard a knock at the door. My heart sank. It was time. I opened the door to see Lisa standing there, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying, her hands wringing nervously. She looked like a shell of the confident woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Hi," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I stepped aside, letting her in without a word. She walked into the living room, and I closed the door behind her. We stood there for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the weight of everything that had gone unspoken between us pressing down. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I know that doesn't even begin to cover it, but I don't know what else to say." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. I needed to hear it all. The why, the how, the everything. "I never wanted this to happen," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I swear, I didn't plan it. It just happened." I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger rising again. It just happened. That was the excuse? Like she had tripped and fallen into an affair? "When?" I asked, my voice cold. She looked down at the floor, wringing her hands together. "It started a few months ago. I don't even know how to explain it. I felt like we were drifting apart, and I was lonely. Jake was there. He listened to me, made me feel seen again." The words stung, but I kept my composure. "So it's my fault?" "No," she cried, looking up at me with wide eyes. "No, that's not what I'm saying. This is all on me. I messed up. I betrayed you, and I hate myself for it." I crossed my arms, trying to keep the flood of emotions at bay. "How long has it been going on?" "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It was never supposed to be anything serious. I didn't even mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You didn't mean for it to go this far? Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds, Lisa? You lied to me, over and over again." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "I know, and I can't take it back. But I'm begging you, please, let's fix this. I'll go to therapy. We'll go to therapy. I'll cut off all contact with Jake. Whatever you want, just please don't leave me." Her desperation hung in the air, and for a brief moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman I had built my life with. But that woman was buried under too many lies, too much betrayal. There was no coming back from this. "I'm filing for divorce," I said quietly. Lisa let out a sob, collapsing onto the couch. "Please, please don't do this," she begged. "We can get through this. We can fix it." But I was done. I had made my decision, and nothing she said could change that now. "I'm sorry," I said, though the words felt hollow. "But it's over." And with that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her behind in the silence of our broken home. After leaving the room, I headed upstairs and closed the bedroom door behind me, leaning my back against it for support. I could still hear Lisa's muffled sobs echoing through the house, but they felt distant, as though they were coming from someone else's life. This wasn't how I had ever imagined my marriage ending. I'd always thought if we ever hit a rough patch, we'd work through it. Fight, maybe even scream, but we'd fight together. But this, there was no coming back from this. I sat down on the bed, my eyes catching the corner of our wedding photo again, the one I hadn't been able to bring myself to move or hide away. Lisa and I, so young and so in love, smiling like we had the whole world ahead of us. I wanted to tear it off the wall, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. A soft knock came from the other side of the door, tentative, like Lisa was afraid to push too hard now. She had reason to be. Can we just talk some more?" she asked from the other side, her voice fragile, like a single wrong word could break her. "I don't want to leave things like this." I stared at the door for a moment, taking a deep breath before standing up and opening it. Her face was puffy, eyes bloodshot from crying. She looked broken, like someone who had realized too late just how deep she'd cut. "We don't have anything more to say, Lisa," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You cheated. We're done. It's as simple as that." She stepped closer, her hands reaching out to touch me, but I pulled back and she stopped, her arms dropping to her sides. "It wasn't because I didn't love you," she said, her voice cracking. "I've always loved you. I don't know how I let things get this far. That's what kills me the most," I said, feeling the rage flare up again. "You didn't just cheat on me, Lisa. You did it while we were still pretending to be happy? While you came home every night, while we were still trying. At least I thought we were trying. I was trying too, she pleaded, stepping toward me again. I was just so confused. Jake, he was an escape, that's all. I thought it was a mistake, but I didn't stop it. I'm so sorry, but it didn't mean anything. I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. It didn't mean anything? You've been lying to me for months. You met him at a hotel. You sent him texts and pictures behind my back. That means something, Lisa. You don't just accidentally have an affair for months. Her face crumpled again, and I could see the cracks forming in the mask she had been wearing since I'd confronted her. For the first time, I wondered if even she understood why she had done it. But that didn't matter to me anymore. Whether she was lost or not, whether she regretted it or not, the damage was done. Where do we go from here? She asked quietly, almost as if she didn't want to hear the answer. We get a divorce, I said, the words feeling like a final nail in the coffin of our relationship. I've already contacted a lawyer. Her breath hitched at that, and I could see the panic set in again. No, she whispered, shaking her head. Please, let's try counseling. Let's just... I know I don't deserve it, but can we at least try to save what we have? I leaned back against the dresser, staring at her, wondering how she could be so naive. Lisa, what do you think is left to save? I asked. You've been lying to me for months. You've betrayed my trust in every possible way. You've destroyed everything we had. She stood there silent, her tears running freely now. Her hands trembled at her sides, and for a moment, I felt a small pang of pity. I knew I was being harsh, but I also knew that if I softened, if I let myself believe her words, I'd be the one who ended up broken again. I'll go stay at my sister's tonight, she finally said, her voice barely audible. I don't know what else to do. I nodded, grateful for the space. I needed time to think, time to be alone without her presence haunting every corner of the house. That's probably for the best, I said, my voice detached. She lingered for a moment, like she wanted to say something else, but then turned and walked out of the room. I listened to her footsteps as they slowly faded down the stairs, then heard the sound of the front door closing behind her. Silence filled the house once again. I stayed in the bedroom for what felt like hours, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I thought back to how we had met, how we had grown together, the years we had spent building a life. I had never imagined it would all crumble like this. I had never thought Lisa would be the one to betray me. Eventually, I moved to the couch in the living room, my body heavy with the emotional toll of the day. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't reach for my phone. I just sat there in the quiet, trying to figure out where to go from here. In the stillness, I felt a wave of anger and grief roll over me. How had I not seen the signs earlier? How had I missed the growing distance between us and the cracks that had been slowly widening while I convinced myself everything was okay? And how had I let her continue to lie to me, to make me feel like I was imagining the distance? I wanted answers, but I knew they wouldn't change anything. No explanation could make up for the betrayal. There was no way to undo the months of deceit, the lies that had eroded the foundation of our marriage. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in years, I felt truly alone. There was no Lisa to turn to, no partner to help me navigate this pain. She had been the cause of it, but even in the depths of my despair, there was a small flicker of something else, freedom. As much as it hurt to admit, my life with Lisa had been slowly suffocating me, and her betrayal had only sped up the inevitable. I had a chance to start over, to rebuild my life on my terms. Tomorrow I would start the process. I'd meet with the lawyer, I'd move forward with the divorce, and I would begin the difficult but necessary work of piecing my life back together. But tonight I allowed myself to grieve, to sit in the wreckage of my marriage and feel every single ounce of the loss. Because as much as I hated her for what she had done, part of me still loved her. And that was the hardest part of all. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting a pale glow across the living room. I hadn't slept much, if at all. The couch had been my bed for the night, my mind a whirlwind of everything I had to face, what life would look like now that my marriage was over, and how I'd navigate the crushing void Lisa's betrayal had left behind. The house felt unbearably quiet without her. That silence used to be comforting, a peaceful end to a long day, but now it was suffocating. Every corner of this place held a memory of her, our laughter, our arguments, the mundane moments we had shared. It had been our home, but now it felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. I got up from the couch, stretching my sore muscles, and headed into the kitchen. Making coffee felt like a small attempt to regain some normalcy, but even that didn't help. As I watched the coffee drip into the pot, I couldn't stop replaying the events of the last few days in my head. How everything had crumbled so quickly. How Lisa's face looked when she'd left last night, devastated and broken, just like me. But I couldn't allow myself to feel sympathy for her. Not now. She'd made her choices, and now I had to make mine. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping the coffee, and mentally prepared myself for the meeting with the lawyer later today. Divorce. The word still didn't feel real, even though I had said it out loud to her. We were going to end it, untangle the life we'd spent years building together, and go our separate ways. The enormity of it all felt like a tidal wave, threatening to crash down at any moment. I thought about the house, the belongings, everything that would be divided between us. Even though the practicalities of divorce were clear, the emotional toll wasn't something I had anticipated. How did we go from planning our future together to planning the division of assets? It was a thought that left a bitter taste in my mouth. My phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated, not sure if I wanted to see Lisa's name on the screen again. But it wasn't her. It was my lawyer's office confirming my appointment. A cold pit settled in my stomach as I read the message. Knowing this was only the beginning, I texted back, confirming the time, and then stared at the phone, wondering if Lisa had tried to reach out since she left. I hadn't heard a word from her since she walked out last night. Not a call, not a text. Part of me was relieved. Maybe she had finally accepted that it was over. But another part of me knew it wasn't that simple. People didn't just walk away from a life like ours without a fight. With the coffee mug still in hand, I walked back into the living room and sat down, staring at the walls, thinking about how much would change once this was all over. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but maybe, just maybe, it was the only way for both of us to move on. There was no trust left between us, and without trust, what was there? Hours passed in a blur, and before I knew it, it was time to get ready for my meeting. I grabbed my jacket and keys, taking one last look around the house before I stepped out. This place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a reminder of what I had lost. The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet, the radio off, the sound of the road beneath the tires, the only noise keeping me company. My mind kept wandering back to Lisa. Was she at her sister's, or had she gone somewhere else? Was she already talking to Jake again, trying to salvage whatever twisted relationship they'd built? I tried not to think about it, but the thoughts were relentless. When I arrived at the office, I was greeted by the receptionist and asked to wait in the lobby. My leg bounced nervously as I sat there, my eyes scanning the room. It was a small, clean office, typical of any law firm, but I couldn't help but feel like I was walking into a courtroom where my life was about to be dissected piece by piece. "Mr. Andrews?" A voice called out from the doorway, and I looked up to see a tall, well-dressed man in his early 40s standing there. "I'm Tom Harris, your attorney. Come on back." I followed him down the hall to his office, where he gestured for me to sit in a chair across from his desk. I took a deep breath, trying to steel myself for what was coming next. "So, you mentioned over the phone that you're ready to proceed with filing for divorce," Tom said, glancing at his notes. "I know this process can feel overwhelming, but we'll take it step by step." "Yeah," I replied, my voice strained. I need to get this over with." He nodded, understanding. "It's never easy, but we'll make sure it's as smooth as possible. First, let's go over some basic details. How long have you and your wife been married?" 8 years, I said, feeling the weight of the number. "And do you have children?" I shook my head. "No, no kids." "Okay. Do you own property together? I assume you share the home you're living in?" I nodded. "Yeah, we bought the house together a few years ago." "All right, we'll go over the division of assets later. But for now, let's focus on filing the initial paperwork. From what you've told me, you have grounds for divorce based on infidelity. That's something we can use to expedite the process if necessary." Hearing it out loud, infidelity, made it feel all the more real. I had been cheated on, betrayed by the woman I loved, and now my life was being boiled down to legal terms and paperwork. "I'm ready," I said, though my voice wavered. Tom began to explain the next steps in detail. The paperwork, the timeline, how we'd serve Lisa the divorce papers. He was calm and methodical, the way I supposed a good lawyer should be. but everything felt distant, like I was watching it all happen from a step outside my own body. Once the logistics were laid out, he asked me more about what I wanted out of the divorce. "Do you want to keep the house?" he asked, flipping through a document. I paused. The house. I hadn't thought that far ahead. Could I even live there after everything that had happened? Could I sleep in the same bed, walk through the same rooms knowing what they had witnessed? I, I'm not sure, I admitted, my voice soft. "I don't know if I want to stay there." "That's understandable," he said, his tone empathetic. "You don't have to make that decision right now. It's something we'll deal with as the process moves forward." He asked a few more questions about our finances, if we had any joint accounts, credit cards, things like that. It all felt so mechanical, like we were talking about a business deal instead of the end of a marriage. But I knew it was necessary. This was the practical side of things, the part that had to be dealt with, no matter how messy it felt. By the time the meeting was over, I felt emotionally drained, but also a little more in control. There was a plan now, a path forward, even if it was a painful one. "We'll move forward with the filing, and I'll keep you updated every step of the way," Tom said as we stood by the door. "If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thanks, son," I said, shaking his hand. "I appreciate it." As I walked out of the office and headed back to my car, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and a sense of finality. The wheels were in motion now. There was no turning back. The drive home was quieter than the drive there. I didn't think about Lisa this time. I didn't think about what had happened in that hotel room or how things had fallen apart between us. Instead, I thought about what came next, how I'd rebuild, how I'd move on from this wreckage. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. It still didn't feel like home, but maybe, just maybe, that would change with time. Maybe one day I'd be able to look at this place and see something new, something that wasn't tied to Lisa, but for now it was just a house, and I was just someone trying to figure out how to live again. When I stepped inside the house, everything felt even more hollow than before. The meeting with the lawyer had been a step forward, but it didn't make the house any less heavy with memories. I dropped my keys on the counter, staring around the living room, wondering how I was going to live in this place, surrounded by echoes of Lisa. I glanced at my phone, expecting some message from her, but there was nothing. Just the dead silence of someone who had vanished after our last conversation. I should have been grateful for the quiet. No more begging texts, no more desperate apologies, but it felt eerie, almost unsettling, like she had given up completely, and maybe she had. I sat down on the couch, taking a deep breath. My mind kept replaying everything: the hotel, the confrontation, the weight of her betrayal. No matter how much I tried to distance myself from it, the hurt clung to me, like a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. I reached for the remote and turned on the TV, trying to drown out the thoughts with mindless noise. But nothing held my attention. My mind was too restless, too focused on what came next, on what my life would be like from now on. Eventually, I got up and wandered through the house. Every room was a reminder of the life Lisa and I had built together. The framed photos on the wall, the little knickknacks we had collected over the years. They all felt foreign now, like relics from a life that no longer existed. I walked into the bedroom, the bed still unmade from the night before. The sight of it made my chest tighten. This was the same bed we had shared for years, the place where we had once been so close. Now it felt like a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. I opened the closet, staring at her clothes still hanging there. I wanted to pull them all down, throw them in a box and get them out of my sight, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. As much as I wanted to move on, I wasn't ready to erase her completely from my life. Not yet. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions of my daily life, work, eating, trying to sleep, but nothing felt normal. It was like I was living in a dream, waiting to wake up from the nightmare that had become my reality. Every time I walked through the front door, I half expected to see Lisa sitting on the couch, waiting for me with that familiar smile. But of course, she never was. A few days later, she finally texted me. I wasn't surprised. It had only been a matter of time before she reached out again, but seeing her name on my screen still made my heart sink. "Lisa, can we meet? Please, I just want to talk. One last time." I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell her no, that there was nothing left to say, but another part of me, the part that still ached for answers, was curious. Maybe there was something left to talk about. Maybe this was the closure I needed to move on. After a few minutes of deliberating, I typed out a reply. Me. We can meet tomorrow. Same cafe. It was the place where we used to go on weekends, back when things were still good between us. A part of me knew it was a mistake to meet her there, in a place filled with memories of happier times. But I couldn't think of anywhere else. At least it was neutral ground. The next day, I found myself sitting in that same cafe, at the table by the window where we always used to sit. I had arrived early, needing time to collect my thoughts before Lisa showed up. The familiarity of the place felt both comforting and suffocating. It was like I was walking through the ruins of our old life together, and every corner of the cafe whispered stories of what we used to be. I didn't have to wait long. Lisa walked in just a few minutes later, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She looked different. There was a heaviness about her, a weight that hadn't been there before. She gave me a small, hesitant smile as she approached the table. "Hi," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Hi," I replied, my voice neutral. I didn't want to give away how much this meeting was affecting me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with tension, with words unspoken and emotions still raw. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to change anything. Could anything really make this better? "I don't even know where to start," Lisa finally said, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. This was her moment. She had asked to meet, and I was going to let her speak. "I've been thinking a lot about what I did, about how I hurt you," she began, her voice shaky. "And I know you don't owe me anything, but I need to say this. I'm so sorry. I was selfish, and I took you for granted. I can't even explain why I did what I did, but it wasn't because I didn't love you. I was just lost." I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back the flood of emotions threatening to break through. Hearing her say it out loud, admit her betrayal, confess her guilt, it felt like reopening a wound that had barely begun to heal. "I don't know what you want me to say," I said quietly, looking out the window to avoid her gaze. "You cheated, Lisa. You lied to me for months. And now you're sorry." "I know," she whispered. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I need you to understand that it wasn't because of you. It was because of me. I was unhappy, and instead of talking to you, instead of trying to fix it, I ran. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I can't take it back." I turned my gaze back to her, studying her face. There was genuine remorse there, a sadness that ran deep. But it didn't change what had happened. It didn't undo the months of lies, the betrayal, the damage she had caused. "I loved you," I said, my voice low and steady. "I would have done anything for you, but you didn't give me that chance." Tears welled up in her eyes and she nodded, wiping them away with the back of her hand. "I know, and I'm so sorry." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of everything between us pressing down on both of us. I could see that she was hurting, but I wasn't sure if it was enough to heal what had been broken. "I'm filing for divorce," I finally said, breaking the silence. "I met with a lawyer." She flinched at the words, her expression crumpling. "I figured," she whispered. I hoped we could, I don't know, maybe I was stupid to think there was a chance." "There's no going back from this," I said, my voice firm. "Too much has happened." She nodded, looking down at the table, tears falling silently onto her lap. I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that this was truly the end of something that had once meant everything to me. But there was also a sense of relief that I was finally taking control of my life again, that I was moving forward. "I'm sorry," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll always be sorry." And with that, she stood up, gave me one last tearful glance, and walked out of the cafe. I watched her go, feeling the finality of it all settle over me. It was over. I sat there for a while longer, staring out the window, watching the world go on outside. The same cafe where we had shared so many happy moments was now the place where we had said goodbye. There was a bitter irony in that, but I couldn't dwell on it. Not anymore. I finished my coffee, left a tip on the table, and walked out of the cafe, knowing that from this moment on, everything would be different. It was time to start over. As I walked out of the cafe and into the cold afternoon air, a sense of finality settled over me. There was no going back now. The chapter of my life with Lisa was closed, and no amount of apologies or regrets could rewrite it. I felt lighter somehow, but there was still a weight in my chest. Grief, maybe. or the remnants of love that hadn't quite faded yet. The divorce would be a process, but emotionally I was already done. Every time I tried to think about forgiving her or finding a way to heal together, the image of her and Jake in that hotel room flooded my mind. There was no escaping it, no moving past it. I spent the rest of that day in a kind of haze, replaying the cafe meeting in my head. Lisa had looked so broken, so full of regret, but it didn't matter. The damage was too deep, and I couldn't let myself get swept back into her remorse. If I let myself feel sorry for her, I might start to forgive her, and I knew that would only drag me down again. By the time I got home, the sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow through the windows. The house was still the same, quiet, empty, but I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. It wasn't comforting yet, but it didn't crush me like it had before. I sat down on the couch and opened my laptop, knowing I needed to start organizing the next steps. There were bills to figure out, the house to deal with, and the logistics of separating our lives. It felt overwhelming at first, but I was ready. This was my life now, a life without Lisa, and I had to take control of it. The next few days were a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with my lawyer, and slowly starting the process of disentangling our lives. Lisa and I communicated only through text or our lawyers now, keeping things as civil as possible. Every time her name popped up on my phone, a knot formed in my stomach. But I reminded myself that this was the path to freedom. Each interaction brought us one step closer to closing the door on what we once had. The hardest part was dealing with the house. As much as I had dreaded the idea of staying here, selling it felt like losing the last connection to my old life. But I knew I couldn't stay. Too many memories haunted these walls, and I needed a fresh start somewhere else. My lawyer assured me that selling the house was the best option. We'd split the profits, and I could move on, find a new place that wasn't weighed down by the past. I agreed, though it felt like a part of me was crumbling with the decision. This had been our home, our safe space, and now it was just another casualty of the affair. Lisa didn't fight me on the house. In fact, she seemed relieved when I brought it up, like she had been waiting for me to suggest it. I wondered if she felt the same way about the memories that filled this place. Did she feel as haunted by the good times as I did? Or was she already moving on, putting it all behind her? It didn't matter. Soon the house would belong to someone else, and I would be free to start over. A week after our meeting at the cafe, the divorce papers were ready. My lawyer sent me the final documents to review, and I signed them without hesitation. There was no point in dragging it out any longer. We had already agreed on the terms, and there was nothing left to discuss. As I sat there signing the last page, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, and something else I couldn't quite place. It was like a door had been shut, but a window had cracked open, letting in the first breath of fresh air I'd had in months. The papers were filed, and Lisa was served the next day. I received a text from her that evening. "Lisa, I got the papers. I guess this is really happening." I stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence speak for itself. But another part of me, the part that still cared, despite everything, felt like I owed her some kind of response. Yeah, it's real now. I waited for her to reply, but nothing came. It felt like the final note of our story had been written. There was nothing left to say. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Between selling the house, sorting through our things, and making plans for my future, I barely had time to think about Lisa. But every now and then, in the quiet moments, I found myself missing her. Not the Lisa who had lied and cheated, but the Lisa I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The Lisa who had been my best friend, my partner, the woman I had planned to spend the rest of my life with. It was a strange kind of grief, mourning someone who was still alive, but no longer a part of my world. I wasn't mourning the end of the marriage so much as the loss of the person I thought I knew. It was like waking up from a dream, only to realize the dream had never been real in the first place. But I couldn't dwell on it. I couldn't let the past keep me anchored in a place that no longer existed. I had to move forward. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my things in the house, I came across an old photo album. It was tucked away in the back of a closet, forgotten among the clutter. I sat down on the floor and flipped through the pages, each photo a snapshot of our life together. Vacations, holidays, lazy weekends spent lounging on the couch. We looked so happy in those photos, so sure of our future. I felt a lump form in my throat as I stared at a picture of us from our first anniversary. We were at the beach, our arms wrapped around each other, laughing at something I couldn't remember now. It felt like looking at strangers. I closed the album and set it aside, knowing I couldn't take it with me. It belonged to a different time, a different version of myself, a version I was leaving behind. By the time the house was sold and the papers were finalized, I was ready to move on. I found a small apartment across town, a place where I could start fresh, away from the memories that haunted the old house. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered. On the day I moved out, I took one last look around the house, letting the memories wash over me one final time. There was no more bitterness, no more anger, just a quiet acceptance that this chapter of my life was over. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me for the last time. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was the life I had now, and I was ready to live it. The new apartment was small but perfect for what I needed. Something simple, a clean slate. It had none of the baggage that the house carried, none of the memories of Lisa lingering in every corner. Moving in felt like I was finally turning the page to a new chapter, one that was mine alone. Unpacking was strangely therapeutic. Every box I opened reminded me of the things I had built for myself before Lisa, things that had been overshadowed by our life together. I hung up a few old posters I hadn't seen in years, set up the bookshelves, and even arranged the kitchen just the way I liked it. There was no one else to consider now. No compromises. It was just me. I spent the first night in the new place sitting on the balcony, a beer in hand, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The air was cool, a reminder that fall was creeping in. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I felt truly at peace. The apartment was mine, the decisions were mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't tangled up in someone else's life. The divorce had been finalized a few days ago. My lawyer had called to let me know everything was official. Lisa and I were no longer married. It hit me hard at first hearing those words. Finality had a weight to it I hadn't been prepared for. I knew we were over, had known for months, but the legal stamp on it felt like closing the door to something that had once been my whole world. But now, sitting here in my new space, I felt a calm I hadn't expected. The grief was still there, lingering under the surface, but it wasn't overwhelming anymore. It was a part of me now, something I had to live with, but not something that defined me. It was strange how life could move forward even when you thought it would never be the same. In the days that followed, I threw myself into work, focusing on rebuilding a routine. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when I felt the sting of Lisa's betrayal, still nights when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we had gotten here. But those moments were becoming fewer, and I was starting to accept that this was my new normal. I hadn't heard from Lisa since we signed the final papers. We had agreed to keep communication to a minimum, and I was grateful for that. I didn't need any more reminders of what had happened. Every now and then, I wondered how she was doing, whether she was moving on, if she was with Jake. But those thoughts didn't consume me anymore. They were fleeting, like echoes from a distant past. One afternoon while I was out grocery shopping, I ran into an old friend, Tom, a guy I hadn't seen since my wedding. He was one of those friends I had lost touch with over the years, not out of malice, but because life had simply pulled us in different directions. "Hey, man! Long time no see," Tom said, clapping me on the shoulder. His smile was warm, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes, like he was wondering what had happened to me in the years we hadn't spoken. "Tom, wow," I replied, a bit startled to see him, but genuinely glad. "Yeah, it's been a while." We caught up for a few minutes, exchanging pleasantries about work and life. But eventually, the conversation shifted to what had happened. "I heard about the divorce," he said, his tone gentle, as if he didn't want to pry but couldn't help himself. "I'm sorry, man. That's rough." I nodded, giving him a tight smile. "Yeah, it's been a tough year." Tom looked at me for a moment, then offered a reassuring smile. "Well, if you ever need to talk, or just grab a drink, hit me up. I know we haven't kept in touch, but I'm here." I appreciated the gesture. It was nice to know that even after all the time that had passed, there were still people who cared. "Thanks, Tom. I might take you up on that." We exchanged numbers and parted ways, but the interaction left me thinking. For so long, my world had revolved around Lisa and our life together. I had lost touch with so many people, so many parts of myself that had nothing to do with her. Maybe it was time to start reconnecting, Not just with old friends, but with who I was before the marriage. That night, I sent Tom a text, taking him up on his offer for drinks. We met up the next weekend, and it felt like a step in the right direction. We didn't dive too deeply into my personal life, but we laughed, reminisced about old times, and for a few hours, I felt like myself again. The version of me that existed before everything went wrong. In the weeks that followed, I made an effort to reconnect with other friends too. People I hadn't spoken to in years. People I had drifted away from during my marriage. Some were surprised to hear from me, but most were welcoming, happy to catch up and grab a drink or a coffee. It felt good rebuilding those bridges, remembering that I wasn't defined by the failure of my marriage. The more I reconnected with people, the more I started to see myself differently. I wasn't just the guy whose wife had cheated on him. I was still me, the person I had been before the betrayal, before the heartbreak. And while the pain was still there, it wasn't the only thing that defined me anymore. One weekend, after hanging out with Tom and a few other friends, I found myself sitting in my apartment, feeling lighter than I had in months. The weight of the past was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. I was learning how to carry it without letting it crush me. The apartment was starting to feel like home. I had decorated it with a few new pieces, added some personal touches, and made it mine. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something to look forward to. Not just a future without Lisa, but a future that was entirely my own. I knew I wasn't fully healed yet. There were still moments when the pain resurfaced, moments when I thought about what could have been, about the life Lisa and I had planned. But those moments didn't control me anymore. They were just part of the process, part of the journey towards something better. One evening, as I sat on the balcony, watching the sun set over the city, I realized that I was okay. Not perfect, not fully healed, but okay. And for now, that was enough. The future felt uncertain, but it also felt wide open. I didn't know what was coming next, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore. I was ready to face whatever came my way. For the first time in months, I felt free. As the days passed, I settled into a rhythm in my new life. It wasn't the life I had imagined, but it was one that was mine now. I had started focusing on myself in ways I hadn't done in years. Small things like going for a run in the mornings, reading more books, and rediscovering hobbies I had left behind, all brought me a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. The weight of the divorce, of Lisa's betrayal, didn't hang over me as heavily as it once had. I could go through an entire day without thinking about her or what had happened between us. And when the thoughts did come, they didn't hurt as much. It was more like a distant ache, a reminder of something that had happened long ago, but no longer defined me. One evening, I found myself at a small bar downtown, sitting with Tom and a few other friends. It had become a regular thing, meeting up with old friends, rebuilding connections that had fallen away during the years I had been so wrapped up in my marriage. We laughed, swapped stories, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly part of something again. As the night wore on, Tom nudged me and nodded toward the end of the bar. "Hey, that woman over there has been looking your way for a while now." I glanced over, feeling a bit self-conscious. Sure enough, a woman at the end of the bar caught my eye. She smiled, and I gave her a small nod in return. There was something warm and genuine about her smile. Not the kind of forced flirtation I had seen in bars before. "You should go talk to her," Tom encouraged, a grin spreading across his face. I chuckled and shook my head. "I'm not really looking for anything right now, man. I'm not saying get married again tomorrow. Just talk to her. You've been through hell. You deserve to have a little fun." I considered it for a moment. I hadn't even thought about dating or relationships since the divorce. The idea of getting close to someone again felt foreign, like it was something for another version of me, a version that hadn't been burned. But Tom was right. Talking to someone didn't mean I was diving back into anything serious. It was just a conversation. I took a deep breath, excused myself from the table, and made my way over to the woman at the end of the bar. She looked up as I approached, her smile widening. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual but probably coming off as a bit awkward. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," she replied, gesturing to the empty stool beside her. I sat down, and for a moment there was an awkward silence. Then she laughed softly, breaking the tension. "I'm Emily, by the way." "I'm Alex," I said, returning the smile. We started talking, about the usual small talk things at first, what we did for work, how we ended up at this particular bar. But as the conversation flowed, I found myself enjoying her company. She was easy to talk to, and there was no pressure, no expectations. It was just a genuine connection between two people having a good time. As the night went on, we laughed more than I had in a long time. It wasn't forced or strained like some of the interactions I had had post-divorce. It was natural. When the bar started to close down, Emily glanced at her phone and sighed. "I should probably head out," she said, standing up. "It was really nice talking to you, Alex." "Yeah, it was," I replied, feeling a small pang of disappointment that the night was ending. "Maybe we could do it again sometime?" She smiled, reaching into her purse to grab a pen. She scribbled her number on a napkin and handed it to me. "I'd like that." We said our goodbyes, and as I watched her leave, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about Lisa. I wasn't comparing Emily to her or wondering what Lisa would have thought. I was just in the moment, enjoying the possibility of something new, something different. As I walked back to the table where Tom and the others were sitting, I felt lighter. Maybe Tom had been right. Maybe I did deserve a little fun. I wasn't ready to dive into another relationship, but I didn't need to be. I was taking things one step at a time, learning how to live for myself again. That night, as I sat on my balcony, the napkin with Emily's number resting on the table beside me, I realized how far I had come. The grief was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. I had survived the worst of it, and now I was standing on the other side, ready to rebuild. I thought back to everything that had happened, the betrayal, the divorce, the heartache. There had been moments when I didn't think I would make it through, moments when I felt like I had lost everything. But now I understood that I hadn't lost myself. I had been there all along, waiting to be rediscovered. It wasn't about forgetting Lisa or pretending the past didn't exist. It was about accepting that part of my life and moving forward. I was still me, still capable of happiness, still capable of finding new connections, even after everything. As the city lights twinkled in the distance, I smiled to myself. The future felt open, full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming next. I was ready, ready for whatever life had to offer, ready to live again, and that was enough.